Hi and welcome to the Malat cookery channel. So this is the second video in our series on the basics of barbecue cooking. If you've landed on this video and you haven't seen the first one yet, I suggest you go back and watch that because these videos do follow on from each other. So in our first video we had a look at what we call depth of flavour, how we actually get some flavour into the meat and the different techniques for doing that. In this video we want to concentrate on the meat itself, have a look at the different categories of meat and how we prepare those cuts of meat before they're actually placed onto the barbecue. So as barbecue cooks, we're going to be placing our meat cuts into three basic categories. So on this side we've got fish. This would include shellfish as well. In the centre, what's traditionally called white meat. So this is poultry, but we're going to include game birds in there as well. And then on this side, red meat, what's traditionally called red meat. So this is a beef cut, a steak. But we're going to include all meat apart from what we classify as white meat and what we classify as fish. So there's always been a problem for scientists in categorizing meat into red meat and white meat because different scientists measure different things within the meat to place them into those categories. For us as barbecue cooks, we're really more interested in how technically challenging the cut of meat is, which is why we've got three categories. The fish and shellfish, technically very challenging to cook properly on a barbecue. In the centre we've got white meat and we're classing in there poultry and game birds because although not as technically challenging as fish to cook on the barbecue, there are still some problems which we can encounter with regard to that section. And then lastly we've got red meat. In the broadest sense, technically not very challenging when cooking on the barbecue, and that's why everything else apart from what we classify as white meat and fish is all lumped into the red meat section. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to prepare each of those cuts of meat from the different sections. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at what I consider to be the worst case scenario in a barbecue, and that's a buffet style presentation. Now normally we use a buffet style presentation when we've got a lot of people coming round for the barbecue and they're all arriving at different times. The issues obviously with a buffet style presentation is that although the meat can come off the barbecue perfectly cooked, it may have to stand for some time and be warmed through before people actually get to eat it. So in other words, we could have a perfectly cooked piece of meat from the barbecue that will potentially dry out. And then when we look at those three sections or those three categories of meat, where we look at something like fish, which is technically quite challenging to cook anyway, we've then got the added potential that fish will tend to dry out a lot quicker than some of the meat in the other two categories. So the first thing we're going to prepare for the barbecue is the fish. This is done the day before. As you saw from the first video, one of the things we can do to try and prevent a piece of meat from drying out on the barbecue is to introduce that piece of meat into a brine. Now a simple brine is water and salt, but what I've prepared here is a brine of milk, some pink salt, you can use sea salt or normal table salt, and a good measure of freshly ground black pepper. So that's our brine. We're going to place the fish into the brine, cover it with food wrap or cling film and leave that in the fridge overnight. The reason that we're doing it this way is one thing that will happen with the fish is some of the flavour of the fish will come out in the actual brine itself, and it's the brine we're going to use to actually create a sauce as well for this particular recipe. So not only do we have the fish with some added water because we've placed it into a brine, so that will stop it from drying out, but we're also going to serve at the barbecue, we're going to serve the fish with a delicious sauce as well, and that will also assist in keeping the fish nice and moist. So the next thing to prepare is the chicken. I want something completely different as far as flavours go, so I'm doing tandoori chicken for the barbecue tomorrow. Again, this is the day before, so we're going to marinate the chicken in a tandoori sauce. In order to make the tandoori sauce, if you have a look on the Malat YouTube channel at the video which is entitled, I think, Simple Tandoori Chicken, have a look at that. That'll give you full instructions on how to make the sauce. So we're going to marinate the chicken in the sauce overnight. I've also got some chicken breast fillet in there which has been cut into strips because not everybody likes chicken on the bone. So it's just a simple case of making up the sauce as per the video, placing the chicken into the sauce, making sure it's coated well on all sides, covering with food wrap or cling film, and then leaving in the fridge overnight. So with regard to the steak the day before, the good news is there's actually nothing to do with the steak. If we're going to place a seasoning onto the steak, we don't want it to be sat on the steak too long, because as you've seen from the first video, we want the flavours of the steak to come out as well. So nothing to do with the steak, that just goes into the fridge overnight covered in cling film or food wrap. As far as the preparation we need to do the day before the barbecue, that's it. So we'll come back tomorrow and I'll show you a final piece of prep that needs to be done before the meat actually goes onto the barbecue itself. So it's the day of the barbecue, we're a couple of hours before we start to cook. I just want to show you the final bit of prep we're going to do to the fish and also the steak. So the fish has been marinating overnight in this brine of milk, salt and pepper. It will now be well seasoned. What we're going to do now, this is 2 hours before we start to cook, I'm going to place a tablespoon of the Malat Memphis dust actually into the milk mixture itself. The reason we didn't do this the night before is because we don't want too much flavour to go deep into the fish, because with fish we want the flavour of the fish to come out as well. So we just add roughly a tablespoon. So those flavours will continue to go into the fish but won't penetrate too deeply because we've only got 2 hours. And then that'll give a really nice flavour as well to the actual sauce that we're going to make. So this goes back into the fridge. And then we're going to take the fish out about half an hour before we start to cook. And that will give the fish enough time to come up to room temperature. So with the steak, we want to put a dressing of the Malat Montreal Steakhouse seasoning on there. Again, this is about 2 hours before we start to cook. The same reason as the fish, we didn't want the dressing to actually be on the steak overnight because we want the flavour of the steak to come out as well. So we give a nice even dressing over the steak of the Malat Montreal Steakhouse seasoning. Make sure we do that on both sides. And again, this will go back into the fridge, covered with food wrap or cling film, and then taken out of the fridge 20 minutes to half an hour before cooking to allow the steak to rest and come up to room temperature. So that's it for this video. We've gone through the full prep of how to get the meat prepared for the barbecue. In the next video, we're actually going to cook the meat on the barbecue, and we'll go through all the different techniques on how we can do that. As usual, please subscribe to the channel, and if you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button. Thank you very much for watching.